silence, all stand. Please be seated.
Your Honour, the next witness, Mr Blenkiron, has made some handwritten statement, and if I can just hand those up to the bench, and we'll make sure others who need them have them.
Plus, he's made a short supplementary statement.
So this is a replacement statement.
It's a replacement statement, Your Honour. Your Honours and Commissioner will see there's handwritten amendments.
You need to be sworn, Mr Blenkiron. Would you stand for me? We'll just wait till these people come in. Would you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
Affirmation, Your Honour. Thanks.
Affirmation. Would you repeat after me? I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
the
whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth. Thank you. Take a seat. Yes, Mr.
Your Honour. Would you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
Peter Brian Blenkiron.
Mr Blenkiron, you made a statement dated the 13th of May 2015 as amended today.
Yes.
Are the contents of that amended statement true and correct?
Yes.
It'll be Exhibit 2818.
There was one part on page 12 which was a different website. That's the only other thing.
Thank you, Mr Blenkiron. I invite you to read your statement.
Okay.
Omitting the first two paragraphs.
My full name is Peter Brian Blenkiron. I was born in 1962. I'm currently 52 years old. I grew up in Ballarat with two brothers and two sisters. In 1976, I started primary school at St Aloysius Primary in Redan. After prep, I changed schools and went to St Francis Xavier Primary School in Ballarat East, which was run by the Sisters of Mercy. St Patrick's. In 1974, I started in Form 1 at St Patrick's College, Ballarat. I was 11 years old. St Patrick's was I'll be right. Thanks. St Patrick's was a Catholic boys' boarding school run by the Christian Brothers. I was a day student there. My homeroom teacher in Form 1 was Maury Holloway. Brother Edward Vernon Dowland taught me French, maths and singing. I understand that Dowland now goes by the name of Ted Bales. Dowland was a very controlling and strict teacher. He punished students severely when they were disobedient. Dowland set tasks that were very difficult. He often set copious amounts of homework when you could not complete the tasks. Or if you hadn't finished the homework, he took you to the back of the classroom. Here he strapped your hands or used a ruler on your knuckles. Once when I'd been taken to the back of the class, I started crying after the strapping. Dowland tried to comfort me. This is when the sexual abuse started. Pushed his body against me. I couldn't move. As I had my back hard up against the wall, he touched my penis through my pants. This happened a few times. Each time Dowland told the other children in the classroom to face the front of the classroom and not turn around. usually end up with his hands down my pants in the back of the classroom. If there was no sexual abuse after the belting, then you knew that you had a good day. If you just got strapped and punished, then that was okay. Sometimes Dallin said things to me after he abused me, such as, "This is for your own good." Dallin used to take other kids to the back of the classroom to give them the strap. When he did this, he told the class to face the front and not to turn around. I remember him doing this at least once a week. I never turned around after it started. It happened to me. I knew what would happen back there, and I didn't want to see it. One time Dallin attacked my singing during an audition in an empty classroom. This brought me to tears. Once I was upset, he comforted me by cuddling me. My back was against the wall. He kissed my forehead and cheek and then fondled me. I was crying and felt even more shame as it was lunchtime and I could see another student's head bobbing up and he could look through the sash window into the room where Dallin and I were. Dallin said I had potential. If I did what he said, my singing would improve. Around 2007, 2008, a boy from my class told me that he had seen Dallin abuse me at the back of the classroom. I spent the rest of the year in 1974 trying to avoid Dallin in the classroom. I spent the rest of the year in 1974. I used to go to bed and try to hold my breath so I would not have to wake up anymore. So I would die. Death was a better option. Death was a better option than going to school. In November 1974, I got in trouble with Dallin again for not having finished my homework. Dallin told me to meet him after school. He told me to wait at the entrance to the boarding house at St Patrick's College, where his room was. The boarding house was located at the back of the school chapel. What's up to?
Paragraph 16.
Thanks. Dallin took me to his room. That is where the worst stuff happened. I don't remember how. Thanks. Dallin took me to his room. I spent the next few months in a horrible haze. At the beginning of 1975, when I returned to school after the holidays, I was so relieved. Dallin had been moved on. I was no longer teaching at St Patrick's. Life after school. After I left school, I did an apprenticeship and became an A-grade electrician. I became an electrical contractor and started my own business when I was 26. I worked hard at my business, which became very successful. I now realise I used work to keep busy and to distract myself from emotional trauma inside. I would keep distressing feelings at bay by working hard. On weekends, I drank alcohol and partied with friends. Looking back, I used work and social interactions to fill up my quiet time. when I was still the feeling of being ill at ease came up. And I never let anyone in really close. Disclosing the abuse. While I was being abused by Dowland at St Patrick's College, I never told anybody for fear of reprisal by Dowland and what my peers would say or think. I first started talking about the abuse in late 1990s, about the time Ridgedale and Best were going through the courts. I had an argument with a friend about child sexual abuse by Clergy. He said it didn't happen. I said it did. It happened to me. In the late 1990s, I saw an advertisement in the newspaper asking for information about child sexual abuse. I rang the telephone number listed. I don't remember who I spoke to, who placed the advertisement. I told the person who answered about what had happened to me, but I did not give my name. I was scared if I spoke up, I would lose work, as I felt there was a strong Catholic tradition. I was scared if I spoke up, I would lose work. I was in the early 2000s. I was talking to police officer, Detective Mick Glenane, at the gym, and I said to him, I had some stuff happen to me as a kid. At that time, Detective Glenane asked whether I wanted to do anything. I said no. He just said, when you're ready, mate, come in and see us. In about 2000, my first marriage broke down. Around this time, I started falling apart. I mistakenly thought that the answer was to keep moving forward and keep busy. I'd been a high-functioning perfectionist, always reaching forward to attain financial security for my ex-wife and I. The end of my marriage was as if my safety had been taken away. A whole house of cards came down. At the time, I had a tendency to blame my ex-wife, but looking back, I can see I was an emotional cripple. I had nightmares. I had nightmares that in my job as an electrician I was being electrocuted and I'd caught on fire and my brain was burning. In my nightmares I was screaming, but to no avail. I had a breakdown I never really recovered from. I went to a doctor and a psychologist and was put on antidepressant medication. I did not tell my doctor about the abuse because at that stage I did not fully understand the link between the abuse and the difficulties I was having. During this time I couldn't understand what I was feeling or why I couldn't get out of bed. I became unable to even dial telephone numbers. A quote that would have taken me 3/4 of an hour to finish now took me 2 weeks. I thought I was going mad. Telephone numbers. A quote that would have taken me 3/4 of an hour to finish now took me 2 weeks. I thought I was going mad and I was unable to work for much of this time. Eventually I lost my business and the assets I had built up towards healing. In mid I was still depressed. I felt my married at 10. My wife was something we had overlooked. I had told her about the abuse. Wherever an understood to be kind of his association. I thought that thought if anyone was going to know about sexual abuse, it would be the Catholic Church. As it's been going on for a while, I also thought I've got to give the church a chance. So I rang. And Terry Ranger answered the phone. He said, "It's lucky I answered the phone. I take the contact reports for Towards Healing. You can do your counselling." I subsequently met Mr. Ranger from Centrecare and told my story for the first time. While I was talking, I just rolled into the fetal position and started to dry reach. Mr. Ranger got me a bucket, but I pushed him away and managed to hold back the contents of my stomach. I took about 2 to 3 months for my Towards Healing contact report to be finalised. During this time, Mr. Ranger had offered to be my counsellor. He gave me a sheet of affirmations, which I showed to my wife. She told me I should find someone else, which I did. I started seeing a different counsellor, and the church agreed to pay for 5 sessions. After those 5 sessions, I still needed more counselling. I felt that I was just starting to scratch the surface, just starting to move from denial to anger. After the first set of 5 sessions, Shane Wall from the Christian Brothers asked me to go, at that stage he was a mediator asked me to go to a roundtable discussion. He told me that he would be there with a representative of the Christian Brothers, Brian Brandon, and a legal person. He also told me I was welcome to bring a support person or a legal person if I felt that was necessary. I told him I needed more time. I wasn't ready to meet with him yet. I was angry. I asked for more counselling and the Christian Brothers agreed to pay for another 5 more time. I wasn't ready to meet with him yet. I was angry. Again asked me to go to a roundtable discussion with the Christian Brothers. Again I said I need more time. I was trying to function, but I was battling suicidal thoughts. My son had just been born and I was worried about how to keep him safe. My feeling is just that Mr. Wall was trying to push matters to some sort of conclusion or wrap things up. The Christian Brothers agreed to cover a 3rd round of counselling for me. After this, Mr. Wall rang me and told me the Christian Brothers were withdrawing their support. They would not pay, and I said, what does that mean? So they would not pay for any more counselling until I sat down at the table with them. Were withdrawing their support. They would not pay, and I said, what does that mean? So they would not pay for any more counselling. After this conversation, I felt I had no option but to go down the legal avenue as described in the Towards Healing handbook they had sent me. I decided to contact a lawyer, so in about 2007, I rang Peter McCracken. I decided to contact him because I had met him before and I thought I could trust him. I asked Mr. McCracken how much it would cost me to sort out my claim with the church, Christian Brothers. A cost estimate of between $5,000 and $1,000. I agreed to proceed, which I understand was no longer through the Towards Healing process. Around 3 months later, Mr. McCracken rang me and said he needed to consult a Queen's Counsel. He told me the process was between $25,000 and $30,000. This was a lot of money. My wife and I decided that spending up to $30,000 was important as I needed to stand up for myself as an adult, given I couldn't stand up for myself as a child. In 2007, I was diagnosed with late onset of post-traumatic stress disorder caused by the childhood sexual abuse I had suffered at the hands of Dowland. I was also diagnosed with onset of post-traumatic stress disorder caused by the childhood sexual abuse I had suffered at the hands of Dowland. Proceedings were issued in 2007. The legal process dragged on and there were numerous delays. Sometime later, Mr. McCracken rang me and told me that the bill was now up to $90,000. I became even more suicidal. because I felt like I had further damaged my family's financial future. If I died, their financial future would be okay because of my life insurance. Around this time, someone gave me John Ellis's number. Mr. Ellis is a lawyer based in Sydney. At this time, I did not know Mr. Ellis had taken the Catholic Church to court. I rang Mr. Ellis and he told me that the best way to get things back on track was to go to mediation. Mr. Ellis rang Mr. McCracken and told him this as well. A mediation was arranged in Melbourne and I was represented by Mr. McCracken and Jeff Moore QC. Mr. Ellis flew down from Sydney to come to the mediation. Mr. Ellis sat outside the mediation room for the whole time we were there, as Mr. McCracken would not let Mr. Ellis come into the room. While we were preparing for the mediation, Mr. Moore QC asked Mr. McCracken where the legal costs were up to. Mr. McCracken handed him a sheet of paper with a figure on it. I saw the note and the figure was $147,000. I asked him whether that included costs up to $147,000. Mr. McCracken said yes. A week after mediation, I went to see Mr. McCracken. I asked him what the worst case scenario would be if we went to a hearing. He told me that it would cost me $300,000 to see Mr. McCracken. I asked him what the worst case scenario would be. I rang Mr. Ellis for help. I was worried that Claire and I would have to sell our property, family home. Mr. Ellis asked me to think about a values-based solution. In other words, to work out what I could live with if we were able to make this go away quickly. I talked about it with my wife and I figured that since the Christian Brothers were paid to educate me and keep me safe, if they pay for the school fees of my 2 children and my mammoth legal costs, I could live with that. I figured I would have to sell some property to reduce my debts and that I would have to pay breakout fees as a result. I asked that the settlement also cover those costs. All of those expenses amounted to $445,000. Mr. Ellis spoke to the Christian Brothers, who agreed to settle for this amount. The Christian Brothers made me this offer through McCracken. McCracken rang me and said, "You can't take that." I didn't know what to do. I felt that he was not listening to me. I told him I wanted to settle. Mr. McCracken later sent me a bill of $168,000 and told me that he would hold the settlement money until the dispute over costs was resolved. After this, I decided I did not want McCracken to act for me anymore. I rang Mr. Ellis and asked him to sort it out. Mr. Ellis sent me through the settlement paperwork. I understand he also wrote to Mr. McCracken and told him he wasn't to contact me anymore. I think that part of the reason Mr. McCracken's bill was large to Mr. McCracken and told him he wasn't to contact me anymore. I think that part of the reason Mr. McCracken's bill was large was because the Christian Brothers took lots. The type of defences they took have been described to me as Alice-type defences, as well as limitation of action defences. My case against the Christian Brothers resolved for $442,500 in July 2011. This may seem like a lot of money, but by the time I paid my legal bills, made an advance of $5,000 in July 2011. This may seem like a lot of money. As I was not working, there was no lump sum left over. If I think about my loss of earnings for the past and stretching into the future and the terrible impact of the abuse on my life over the long term, the amount of compensation did not address a real impact on my life and on my family's financial position. Mr Ellis then helped me to resolve my cost dispute with McCracken. I ultimately paid Mr McCracken $117,000 for legal fees. After settlement, I asked for an exit interview with Brother Brian Brandon. Mr Ellis and I met with Brother Brandon in the late 2000s. Brother Brandon told me the reason the Christian Brothers had pressured me to go to a round table meeting when I went towards healing was that they wanted to resolve the matter quickly. Brother Brandon apologised for this and told me the Christian Brothers believed that if it was resolved quicker, this would speed up recovery. Some years after this, I met with Mr Wall and a few others. During this meeting, Mr Wall explained to a person present that the Christian Brothers had pressured me to go to the round table meeting because Catholic Church insurer was putting pressure on them to resolve matters. Overall, my towards healing was fraught. I found the experience to be intrusive, destructive, and not supportive. I felt that in the towards healing process, the Christian Brothers withdrew counselling support to pressure me to resolve my claim early and for a low amount. My experience with Mr McCracken and the litigation process was also very stressful and unsatisfactory. In 2014, I instructed Dr Waller from Waller Legal to act on my behalf in relation to my dissatisfaction with the early process involving the Christian Brothers. She's helping me to seek further assistance from the Christian Brothers to help me deal with the long-term impact of sexual abuse on myself and my family. This matter is ongoing. Ballarat Survivors Group. I used to play footy with a guy who had been at St Lepius. This guy was a plumber and he came around to fix my hot water service one day in 2006, 2007. I was really struggling at the time and I wasn't working, and he asked me what I was doing at home and not at work. This time I'd hardly told people close to me about the abuse. I almost sat down and had a cuppa with him to tell him what was going on. I didn't. Later, he committed suicide. I didn't know it, but he was also going through tough times and had fallen apart. I found out that he had testified at the committal hearing for Brother Robert Best. I believe that if I had sat down and had that cuppa with him, he'd still be alive today. In about 2008, my counsellor suggested I make a list of people that are closest to me and tell them about the abuse. The first time I told anyone on the list, I spent the next 3 days in bed. Once I started to tell people, there were days when I felt I had nowhere to go. I felt there was no one else who really got it. Around this time, I made contact with another survivor of child sexual abuse by Catholic clergy in Ballarat, Stephen Woods. I remember that he had talked about his abuse on 60 Minutes. I contacted him and we caught up. It was good to talk to him. I could tell he understood how I felt. I didn't feel judged. After this, I started telling everyone that I had been sexually abused at St Patrick's. Gradually, people gave me names of... After this, I started telling everyone that I had been abused sexually. I started gathering names of other survivors in Ballarat. In about 2011, the Children of the Phoenix, an organisation that offers scholarships to survivors of childhood sexual abuse, organised a fundraiser in Ballarat. Detective Senior Sergeant Kevin Carsons was on the committee of the organisation, and he organised a table at this event. A survivor from St Alepius Primary School and I contacted other survivors and asked them to come along. 6 or 7 other survivors turned up at this event and joined our table. I had a good night. After this, I arranged monthly events and invited all the survivors I knew. We normally met in a cafe. We didn't talk about the abuse, but I feel that we started to normalise it, the effects of the abuse. Over time, this group got bigger. One day, a survivor came along to one of these events. He was angry. I told him I was struggling too, and he apologised and left. I struggled after this and began to think I was putting myself in a dangerous position. I contacted and I was struggling too, and he apologised and left. I struggled after this and began to think I had been to Casa once before, and I knew one of the guys who went to the men's group therapy there. I got to know Ms. Lockhart over about 3 months. I wanted to be sure I could trust her. Over time, I introduced her to some of the survivors in our group. I held a few barbecues so that we could get to know her. I was aware that it takes time to build trust. This group still meets, and we have come to call ourselves the Ballarat Survivors Group. It says that CARS now runs a group. Before the Victorian Parliamentary inquiry into the handling of child abuse by religious and other organisations, the number of members of the Ballarat Survivors Group. When I said he had been sexually abused as well, he told me that Detective Senior Sergeant Kevin Carson abused. I spoke to a friend of mine who told me that he had been sexually abused as well. He told me that Detective Senior Sergeant Kevin Carson had contacted him in about 2001, and he had found Detective Carson to be helpful and supportive. In about 2013, I sent my Towards Healing contact report to Detective Senior Sergeant Carson. He said to me, "When you're ready, come in and we'll do a statement." In about March 2014, I was contacted by Colleen Connolly from Sarno Task Force to make a statement against Dowland. Dowland was eventually charged with my complaint and pleaded guilty. In 2015, I read out a victim's impact statement at Dowland's sentence. Moving towards Justice Group. In about 2012, Carmel Maloney contacted me, asked me what she could do to help. She suggested I met with some people, including Michael Burke and Frank Shan. I gradually met with the other members of the group. I understand that this group had grown around a parishioner saying, "We need to help." I suggested the group call itself Clergy Related Injury Action Group. Craig, I hope that the group could call for a redress scheme. I thought it would be really positive to have a cross-section of the community calling for a system to stop deaths. I said I'd be the conduit between Craig and other survivors. I used to go to the meetings with Craig. One day I came along to a meeting and discovered the group was in the process of changing their name. The group became known as Moving Towards Justice. I later suggested that Moving Towards Justice could create survivor packs which would provide assistance for survivors in need. Such assistance could include helping with rent or bills or giving petrol or grocery vouchers to survivors. The group obtained some money from the Ballarat Diocese and the Christian Brothers and started providing survivor packs. However, over time the group started asking for the names and addresses of survivors, and this raised issues about confidentiality. Some members of the group said that the packs were creating dependency and wanted more information about the survivor before they agreed to fund them. After a while, I felt that although Moving Towards Justice had good intentions, the process was becoming too intrusive on survivors' privacy. I suggested that Moving Towards Justice needed to help the Catholic community to learn not to turn their backs on their own families, and perhaps that might help the healing. They should concentrate on the church community. Assistance from the Catholic Diocese of Ballarat. Sorry it's taken so long.
That's all right.
During the Victorian parliamentary inquiry, I had heard that the survivors could go to their bishop or provincial leader for help. I also read this on the Victorian Inquiry website. I took my next counselling bill into Bishop Bird's office and asked them to pay it in light of what's above. They asked me whether I would like a cheque or cash. I started holding weekly meetings in a cafe so the survivors could come and bring me receipts that they had from expenses such as counselling, the transport costs of attending counselling, medication and body pain management. That's another water. I took these receipts to the bishop's office and they gave me cheque, sometimes cash, to give back to the survivors. In early 2013, Ms Lockhart and Shireen Gunn from CASA and I met with Mark Bromley and Father Justin Driscoll from the Catholic Diocese of Ballarat and Mr Wall from the Christian Brothers. During this meeting we came up with a process that I called an interim solution, where the Ballarat Diocese and the Christian Brothers agreed to cover certain expenses of a survivor, such as counselling on a case-by-case basis. Under this process, a survivor obtains a recommendation about funding from their general practitioner or counsellor and sends it to the diocese. If the diocese or Christian Brothers approve this funding, it will cover that expense for 3 months. After this, a survivor can reapply for assistance for another 3 months. The 3 months limit was not my suggestion. Concluding remarks and recommendations. I thought I'd been one of the lucky ones, that the abuse hadn't affected me. It took 12 years before I fell apart and broke down. Right? It's not 12 years. I was 38, so from 12 to 38, so that should say
26.
Thanks. 36 years before I fell apart and broke down. By the time I was 38, I progressively lost my business and my ability to earn a living. In late 1974, early 1975, my parents sat me down and said that they'd heard about Dowling. I was just so ashamed of that stuff. I didn't tell them anything. My father died in 2005. In about 2007 or 2008, I finally gave my mother a letter which explained what had happened to me. I tried to soften the blow for her. But she was pretty knocked around. She had started living next door to me, and she noticed that I wasn't going to work and was wondering what had happened. Up until a few years ago, the battle had been not to give up and take my own life. I am no longer suicidal. That's probably it was 12 years not to give up and take my own life. If you have not had to battle with this, it's pretty hard to understand. It's like a stereo going off in your head saying, you're no good, you're worthless. What's the point? Sometimes the volume is at 1, other times it is at 5, and other times it is at a 10. Sometimes the more support you have, the better your counsellor, the more the volume goes down. The more you're alone, isolated and left to listen to those thoughts, the more at risk you are. I was convinced that everybody was better off without me. The impact on my family has been enormous at every level. Emotionally, financially, and on my relationship with my wife, Claire.
Would you like Ms Finesse to finish reading the statement?
I'm going to do this. Thanks. I'll be right. What was I up to?
Paragraph 76.
Thanks. From my experience, I know that if you can find any justification to take your life, you'll take it. Because you think, there's no way out. It's different. To hear from people that have been through it and have recovered is a massive gift. To know that somebody can through those darkest of darkest times, because it gets worse before it gets better. I hope that in telling my story, other people might be assisted, although I am by no means healed. Stuff like I try. I think that the key points are not to be isolated, but to have available professional counselling assistance and community support. I was at my worst when I was alone in my own private hell. I believe I was most at risk of suicide when I was isolated rather than connected and unable to understand what was going on by myself. I hope that by telling my story, others might reach out for help, even if they are okay for the moment. Just on the off chance, it may help to prevent disaster in the future. Almost done. It can't be a coincidence that the suicide rate in Ballarat is higher than the road toll. That ice, alcohol and other drugs are up there with domestic violence and are big issues in Ballarat. I think not. And some of those suicides are not primary victims. The abuse has affected the whole community. In the evening of the first day of these hearings, my son said to me, "I'm scared you're going to die, Dad." He shouldn't have to say that to me. He's 8 years old. We need a supportive system to be put in place. Test it here in Ballarat. Start it, tweak it and roll it out. We could start with something similar that's used for post-traumatic stress disorder sufferers, e.g. TPI for returned servicemen. A supportive system would work at many levels. Our jails are full of abuse survivors. 3 meals a day, a roof over your head. And medical help for a cost of $120,000 per annum. People would live, heal, and some will never fall apart or never miss living life or a day's work. But maybe some never will. It's not really clear there. I'm saying that that's what the government spends on somebody who's put in jail and to redirect the funding. Then teach our kids some skills we have learnt from trauma recovery to equip them for life. The principals at St Pat's Senior School and St Alepius have already shown willingness to partner with us survivors in this. That is how you might change a culture and empty our jails.
Mr. Blenheim, you didn't read the last page, which are 4 paragraphs, but the Royal Commission will most certainly take those into account.
I'm sorry. I call that the trapdoor moment. My brain just tips out. I feel that there have been many suicides in Ballarat caused by... Is that the right one? 71? Yeah. I feel that there have been many suicides in Ballarat caused by child sexual abuse. My friend's suicide in 2009 was what motivated me to make a vow to myself that there would be no more suicides in Ballarat. I started to work on what solutions we could put in place to keep people alive and stop the suicides, because that's really the bottom line. Andrea Lockhart wrote a submission to the Royal Commission in June 2014 for myself, for me and another survivor. That's a number. We recommended that a redress scheme be set up which is administered by the government to assist in compensating people for the years of suffering that abuse was caused. This would include compensation for the impacts of abuse on family, relationships, children, employment and income security. I would not call it a compensation, but a CRI for clergy-related injury. It should be a supportive system like what's offered to return service with PTSD. I think that all survivors of child sexual abuse by clergy fall somewhere on a continuum. Some just want an acknowledgement that the abuse happened and an apology, while others are close to suicide. I think funding should be allocated to each survivor, and the allocation of funding should depend upon where the survivor falls on the continuum. This allocation should change if and when the survivor's needs change. The response should be based on need. This system should be non-intrusive, supportive and responsive. Healing does not take place just for us survivors. It has to take place in the community as well. Unless we can put a scheme in place run by the government and paid for by the responsible church or religious body, then the healing will not take place. We need positive action. Talk is cheap. We need more action and no more abuse-related suicides.
Nothing further, Your Honour.
Anyone else have any questions? Thank you, Mr. Blinken. Thank you for your statement. You are now excused.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Your Honour, there's just one additional matter. My friend, Mr. Gray, was referring to the practice guidelines, and one in particular he was referring to was 67, and I'll read it. Except as set out below, the Royal Commission will not apply the rule in Brown and Dunn if the Royal Commission is to be invited to disbelieve a witness. The material grounds upon which it is said that the evidence should be disbelieved should be put to the witness so that the witness may have an opportunity to offer an explanation. There's an additional sub-paragraph of that guideline, and that is the Royal Commission expects that where it is contended that deliberately false evidence has been given or that there has been a mistake on the part of the witness on a significant issue, the grounds of such contention will be put. Now, I raise that, Your Honour, in order that my friend understands that 67B of the guideline may well be applicable to the matters Your Honour has raised earlier.
Yes, well, the position I think is now crystal clear, or it should be.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Very well, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Thank you, Your Honour.
We'll adjourn.